Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It's so good to be here today. I think some of you may have heard who I am, but I'll introduce myself to you. My name is Reverend Lauren Levwood, and I am connected to this guy over here, William Levwood, who is your regularly scheduled program and is lucky to be your settled minister at this congregation. I am his spouse. I'm so grateful to have the honor of being here today and leading today's worship service in honor of Reproductive Justice on what is the rightful 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. Now, as we begin our service today, I invite you to turn off your devices, silence your phones. If you're at home, don't turn off your devices, but you might want to close your other browsers and windows. Take a nice deep breath. Get a little more comfortable in your seat and center yourself for our time of worship. We open in welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that this church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land, acknowledging that this church, like all of Burke, rests on these unceded territories, recognizing that this land includes people who live on in their descendants as the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Potawatomi Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move towards healing so that all together shall one day know full justice. So our chalice lighting this morning is from the words of womanist theologian Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon. Our bodies are the texts that carry the memories, and therefore remembering is no less than reincarnation.
Welcome to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church, and welcome to our guest minister today. I'm Judy Robison. My pronouns are she and her, and I am your worship associate for today. This congregation is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just and compassionate world. If you're new to Accotink and you'd like to talk more about this church, just about anybody here can talk about it. You can talk to our greeters, our minister, myself, or anyone with a stitched name tag to find out more. Whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our social hour, online and in person, immediately after the service. We're so delighted that you decided to join us today. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So today we're going to learn a little bit from a little bird called Fluff. More Than Fluff by Madeline Valentine. Daisy happened to be very fluffy. Being fluffy was all anyone noticed about her. Aw, aren't you the cutest thing? I could just eat you up. Adorable. They squeezed her, they petted her, they kissed her. They popped up out of nowhere and tried to hug her. It ruffled Daisy's feathers. Only back at home could Daisy relax. Why do I have to be so soft? I'm not just fluff. I have substance. What about a smooch? Something had to change. Daisy decided the time was right for a new look. It was spectacular. But it was also pretty icky, a bit sticky, and super stinky. By the end of the day, Daisy was right back where she started. Daisy couldn't take it anymore. I am more than fluff. Mom decided to have a talk. Daisy, honey, I know you're angry, but you cannot peck others. But everybody cuddles me when I don't want them to. Have you tried telling them how you feel nicely? Daisy hatched a plan. It's time for your afternoon cuddle. Actually, it's time for you to give me some personal space. But I wouldn't mind a wing bump instead. I don't want a hug, but thanks for offering. It's good to see you. With a little practice, Daisy got the hang of letting everyone know what she wanted. I'd prefer if we didn't, but how about a high five? How about a low five? Tail bump, pinky shake, super secret handshake, and I'm so sorry I pecked you. Everyone learned to give Daisy some space when she wanted it, and she did the same for them. Aw, can I give you a hug? Nope, no hug, don't want a hug. I understand. Daisy happened to be fluffy, and that suited her just fine. Would you like me to read you a story before bed? Yes, please. I'd also love a good night hug and kiss if you would. Oh, Daisy, I'm always happy to give you a hug and a kiss. Thanks, Mom. So we've heard of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which means to treat others how you would like to be treated. The lesson of more than fluff is the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them, which means to treat others how they would like to be treated. So in our RE class today, we're going to be talking about ways that we can practice the platinum rule. Thank you.
The reading today is titled On Choosing Abortion by Reverend M. Jade Kaiser of the group Enfleshed. God is not a judge who sits at a distance shaking his finger at us about divine rules and regulations. God is within, like a whisper, like a question, like a knowing and a rising. God lures us toward each other, towards collective flourishing, towards power growing from the margins, towards our roots deep in the earth. God pulls us in every direction that serves love and life. Sometimes that direction is abortion. When a woman or a trans man or a non-binary person with a uterus becomes pregnant and must decide how best to foster life. their own, that of their family, that of this earth breaking under our burdens. God knows for many there are few such choices available in this racist, classist, sexist system. The God of the fringes, the impoverished, the oppressed, condemns every form of coercion and every act of control over the bodies of those who ask all the right questions of life and autonomy and futures and collective well-being under all the wrong systems that abandon and judge and isolate and weigh down. Let us not grow weary in claiming our power, in professing and practicing our spirituality and our solidarity, in sharing our resources, in following the one who from the margin cries, "Come and follow."
The stories of our bodies are sacred. The choices we make for our bodies are holy, and they wholly belong to us. I don't know if you all know that William and I have lived all over the country. One of those places was the San Francisco Bay Area. And when we were living in the San Francisco Bay Area, I was working as a birth doula. And in my work as a doula, I attended a workshop at the Sacred Stream Center called Tracking Spirit in the Birth Environment. I came away from those days of study with one phrase imprinted on my being: return the power to the most vulnerable. Return the power and keep returning the power to the most vulnerable. In the birth room and in life. This spiritual teaching about power and vulnerability was formative in my understanding of how to support the dynamics of childbirth when vulnerability is at one of its peaks. Often when a person giving birth is at their most vulnerable, when life is coming into the world through their body, their choices and their agency are most at risk of being appropriated, and that deserves protection. And this is true not only in birth. When tending to the care of any person, whether they are sick, pregnant, or a baby just entering the world, attuning to that person and giving them agency over their own body can be critical, not only in preventing trauma and unnecessary harm, but in welcoming life-affirming moments that create meaningful memories stitched into our bodies like love letters written into our bones. Return the power to the most vulnerable and help create love and beauty in those delicate moments. That's what this teaching is about. And it's so easy. And it's so easy not to do this. It's so easy to violate this. It's so easy, particularly when power is out of balance, for human beings to use our authority over another's body, stripping one another of our agency and wrecking this divine dance of power until the most vulnerable among us no longer have control over what matters most in their lives. themselves. So you all know the theme for today's worship service, for our time together today, is reproductive justice. Today's service honors the 50th anniversary of the landmark ruling in the Roe versus Wade court case, which legalized abortion and protected accessibility to this essential medical care in all 50 states of the United States. And when Reverend William invited me to preach this sermon, it was actually a year ago, because I preached a similar sermon on the 49th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and at that time, we didn't yet know if the protection that it gave us would still exist when the time came for me to preach this sermon to you today. And as you know, the protection of our inherent agency to make choices about our own bodies without excessive government restriction on our choices was overruled by Dobbs months ago. So now that I've said that, let's all take a breath. The waters are always changing. In addition to this reality, I want you all to know, here and online, that I also know another reality, that we don't all feel the same way about abortion. And that's okay. That's okay. But I'd like to explain to you why our Unitarian Universalist values implore us to support one another's personal life choices and agency. And that word choices is plural for a reason. This is not an issue about choice. It's not about being pro-choice. It's about choices, many choices that make up an intricate, vulnerable, worthy life deserving of beauty. So as defined by Sister Song, which is a national women of color reproductive justice collective, reproductive justice is, quote, the human right to maintain bodily autonomy, 1, have children, 2, not have children, 3, and parent the children that we have in safe and sustainable communities. The right to have bodily autonomy for ourselves, the right to raise our children in communities where they will thrive, the right to decide not to have children, and the right to be able to pursue a family if that's what we choose. So this is reproductive justice. It's all of this and more. It's all of the things that leads us to do and support in our communities. The phrase reproductive justice was coined by a group of Black women in Chicago in 1994. And it expands the middle-class, white woman-centered and white woman-led reproductive rights movement to include a broader, more intersectional social justice lens. In 2015, our UUA Statement of Conscience affirmed reproductive justice as a movement centering the experience of the most vulnerable. And I'm quoting, centering the experience of the most vulnerable and bridging the gap between reproductive rights and other social justice movements. This move from reproductive rights to reproductive justice centers and elevates the most marginalized among us It calls us to return the power to the most vulnerable, advocating for, protecting, and uplifting those most vitally in need of care, so that we all might thrive. So, now we come to what I think is the perpetual question: how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we return the power to the most vulnerable, to those most at risk and most in need? I don't know how familiar you all are with Brian Stevenson, or if any of you heard his Where lecture at our General Assembly in 2017. I did, and it's still living in me today. He told us that it is essential to, quote, get proximate, to get close to those who are most vulnerable and most in need. This is relational work, because we're motivated to do the work from our hearts, and our hearts change when we are in proximity with one another. It's only when we tell our stories and hear the stories of others that our hearts are able to change, and this motivates us to create systemic change. We must be willing not only to support the most vulnerable, but to get close enough to listen if they're outside of us. And if we are the most vulnerable, we must be willing to be vulnerable ourselves and share our stories. We must move through the discomfort together, and it takes trust to do this, to talk and listen to one another. This relational exchange is our best hope for creating justice in the new world that only exists in our dreams. I believe this. For those of you committed to the work that our UUA Commission on Institutional Change has charged us with, which is the work of widening the circle of our concern, or the work our 8th principle calls us to do, which I know this congregation unanimously voted to adopt and support, and are in covenant to promote. So for all of us, this is our work to do. This is your work to do, my work to do. This is our work to do. It's the work our Unitarian Universalist values summons us to do. This is our holy work. Now, I know that for many, if not all, the recent Dobbs attack on bodily autonomy was and is intense. And it's easy to feel hopeless, and that's okay. Grief is a sign of love. But we don't have to approach the aftermath alone. We are still in this together. We can comfort one another. We can continue to be in a relationship with one another and motivate one another and learn from this to become even stronger. We can rise from this fall. Maybe it's even just a stumble. It's still possible to create positive change for the future. In fact, that's still happening. Positive change for the future is still being created every day, all the time. Because so many of us, we do still care. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here today. And we've done it before. 50 years ago today. 50 years ago today, the world changed. And we can do it again. We can create positive change again, even better than before. In fact, I know that there's an even brighter and more powerful and more beautiful future out there than we had with just Roe v. Wade. I know that. So part of our work to do now is to continue to dream that into being. If we can't imagine it, we won't create it. So we have to dream together, envision this into being, and we have to get to work to stitch that new tapestry together. It's our holy work. So I have just a couple of examples of ways that we can begin this work. I know that many of you are already working on this, and you can share amongst yourselves what your own ideas of how to engage are. So one, right now, recruitment is actually happening this week for a UU Reproductive Justice congregational organizing series to train teams within UU congregations for reproductive justice. Training for teams begins a week from today, next Sunday, and registration is happening all week until the 27th. And you can register on the Side with Love website. One option. Last week, I attended the Day of All People with VICPP. I'm assuming some of you know about VICPP. It's not far from here, the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. On this day, last week, the Day of All People, I had the opportunity to join others and sit with my legislators, and I told them that maternal rights are important to me. It was a little intimidating to walk to those offices, and then I realized I was in a cubicle with somebody doing their job, and I was telling them how that I felt. It's very approachable to contact your legislators. Right now, in the Virginia House and Senate, there are bills that are proposed requiring, one, for example, requiring medical practitioners to complete continuing education on implicit bias and cultural competency to protect Black mothers' lives. Unfortunately, maternal death rates are high in the United States, higher than they should be. They're higher in Virginia than in the United States at large. And Black women in particular are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related and childbirth-related causes than white women. This bill requires 2 hours of training on implicit bias to help protect lives. That's just another small example. And I'm so grateful that other people are thinking about these things and providing avenues to create change. Talk amongst yourselves. There's so many ways that we can support reproductive justice. And if you can hear, when we do that, it's supporting, because it's intersectional, so many other justice issues. They are all connected in a web because we are not single issue people. We are complex beings. So advocating to protect maternal lives from medical bias, another example of reproductive justice. Reproductive justice also means advocating for accessible childcare, affordable housing, adequate wages, fertility care, adoption assistance, and doula care, and family planning, and gender affirmation, and domestic violence assistance, and comprehensive sex education, like our very own OWL program. These are all part of reproductive justice. This movement calls us to promote these things for all people. Can you feel the value? For everyone, and particularly for those on the margins who lack access to many of the things that those with the most in the center just take for granted. This is what we mean by widening the circle of our concern to include everyone. returning the power to the most vulnerable, carving out a little more life for all of us, and respecting the stories of our bodies, and creating a world where the lives of all bodies can flourish. It's basic. In a few moments, we will join in a ritual together to honor reproductive choice, or choices. But before we move to this ritual, I'd like to just invite us to be still for a moment. Pause. If you'd like to close your eyes, you can, and turn your attention to your body. What are the stories your body is remembering today? What are the memories your body is holding? What stories make this body, your body, and what are the stories you dream of creating for yourself and the world? Hold on to these stories. Share the hard ones with someone you trust if you need to. We don't need to hold them alone. When you're ready, you can open your eyes again. And let's start to dream together. Dream with me, vision with me, a future where the power is returned to the most vulnerable among us, where the margins are centered and the world is turned right. We have a great example over here of why this is important. We're all on our own journeys for truth and meaning, and this search for truth and meaning is sacred for each one of us. And until we hear one another's stories and pay attention to our own, the quiet ones, the ones in hushed tones, the ones we may only ever sense are there for one another, the ones we listen to with rapt attention, with eyes wet with tears. Until we hear and share these stories, we can never imagine the intricacy of another person's life that brings them to and through their most challenging decisions. And here's the magic thing. When we share the stories, they become ours. I have other people's stories in me too. And so do you. The thing about choosing abortion is that it often isn't easy for anyone, even when the person knows that it's right and is certain and clear about that. People not only need access, people also need us. We need us to change the narrative around abortions, yes, and all of our lives' stories, to hold our stories and our pain in care. Our loved ones need to know that their complicated life stories are precious and we value them, that they are worthy of love and that they can be trusted with their own humanity. We all deserve that, to be trusted with our own life stories and our own humanity. We live in a collective world, and part of being in beloved community together is trusting one another. And we earn that trust through listening with care. When we earn this trust, or when we grant this trust and trust one another with their own lives, This authority over our bodies, this authority granted to the bodies of our beloveds, it is a form of salvation. It saves us. It saves us because it allows us to save ourselves. Now, I almost wrote here that it keeps us from trying to play God, but I don't believe in a God that's dictating my life. If there is a God, I believe in freedom of choice and support and love through the journey. So we can be that for one another and ourselves. We can be that love, and we can see the beauty within and without and nurture that together. And participate in our own salvation over and over again. The future is not written, it's ours to imagine and dream into being, and it's essential that we share our stories with one another and that we continue to return the power where it's most needed to the most vulnerable so that we can stitch our world up with love. So, it's time now, friends. It's time for our ritual moment together to honor our reproductive choices. And as we begin and as we continue through the day, the coming days, I invite you to hold yourselves and your stories very tenderly. This ritual for reproductive choice was written and created by the Reverend Julia Hamilton, and I'm so grateful that she's offered it for us to share. So this sanctuary, as I said, that we create together is a container for our stories, and the sanctuaries of your homes out there is a sanctuary for your stories too. The ones we share and the ones we hold close in the quiet of our hearts, the stories that bring us joy and fulfillment, and the stories that break us open. The stories that change and grow with us, and the stories we outgrow and leave behind. Each and every one of you carries a lifetime of stories every time you enter this space or any space. This morning, there may be stories from your life that surface in unexpected ways, and I'd like to invite you or remind you that if you need support after this service, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is a spiritual community. That's why we're here. And I want to invite you into a ritual space that will hold space for your story, whatever it might be. Now, as we light a series of candles in a few moments for the different paths we've taken, if you recognize yourself in one of these prayers and one of these candles, I invite you to just put your hand over your heart if that feels good. Put your hand over your heart wherever you are and know that you're not alone. There is someone else in this gathered community holding their hand over their heart too. And after we light each candle, I'm going to invite you to breathe in silence or repeat these words with me. And they will be coming up on our screen pretty soon. May the beginnings and endings of our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. So let's try that together now. May the beginnings and endings of our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. Great. So we light the first candle for those whose stories include the choice to end a pregnancy. The circumstances vary. The timeline of our lives are diverse, but each and every end is also a beginning. And so we light this candle for all who have aborted a pregnancy or who have partnered someone in an abortion for whatever reason, under whatever circumstance. May the beginnings and endings of our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. We light the second candle for those whose story includes the unwanted loss of a pregnancy or a struggle with fertility. The circumstances vary. The timelines of our lives are diverse, but the pain of infertility, miscarriage, and stillbirth are too often held in silence. And so we light this candle for all who have traveled this path of loss, for whatever reason, under whatever circumstance. May the beginnings and endings in our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. We light the third candle for those whose story includes the choice to give birth. The circumstances vary. The timelines of our lives are diverse, but the choice to bring a new life into the world is a powerful one. And so we light this candle for all who have given birth or who have partnered in the birth of a child or who have adopted a child birthed by someone else. For whatever reason, under whatever circumstance. Join me. May the beginnings and endings in our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. And the fourth candle. We light the fourth candle for those stories whose includes the choice not to conceive or have children. The circumstances vary. The timelines of our lives are diverse, but the freedom to chart the course of our own reproductive life is sacred. We light this candle for all who have made the decision not to conceive children or bear children for whatever reason, under whatever circumstance. May the beginnings and endings in our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. And the fifth candle. We light the fifth candle for those whose story includes a forced choice or no choice at all, or who have encountered violence where there should have been tenderness and care. The circumstances vary. The timelines of our lives are diverse, but not everyone has been in a position to control their own reproductive choices. We light this candle for all who have found themselves unable to exercise their own sacred reproductive freedom for whatever reason, under whatever circumstance. May the beginnings and endings in our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. And we light the sixth and final candle for those whose reproductive story is still being written. The circumstances vary. The timelines of our lives are diverse, but the future unfolds in surprising and unexpected ways that can be both beautiful and heartbreaking. And so we light this candle for all who are on the threshold, who have agency and choices still to make about their reproductive lives, and for whatever reason, under whatever circumstance. May the beginnings and endings in our stories be held in unconditional love and acceptance. Let's take another breath. May the flames of these candles and the many stories they represent remind us of the fire of commitment we carry inside to ensure that all people have freedom and agency over their reproductive choices and their bodies, and that reproductive justice is upheld as a fundamental right for this and all future generations. Thank you.
And now, as we extinguish our chalice flame, we carry within us what we kindled, the light of inspiration, the warmth of compassion, the fire of commitment. May we bring these gifts into our lives and share them radiantly out into the world. And so I invite you now to join in our community blessing with these words of David Bumbaugh. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.
I invite you to remain standing. Spend a lot of time sitting. You can move around and wiggle around if you want. And then find a center as you receive these words of benediction. These words are by Reverend Karen Johnston, and the title is These Bodies. We Unitarian Universalists, who have long been known to be a bit too much in our heads, have been moving towards a more authentic recognition of our bodies, a more genuine relationship with our bodies and in our bodies. Hallelujah and blessed be. These bodies our homes, these bodies our beings. These bodies without which we can have neither inherent worth nor recognize it in others. These bodies without which we cannot experience the interdependent web of all existence, for it is through our bodies that we are all part of this self-same web. Let us pledge to ourselves, the whole of ourselves, to the great collective liberation of all bodies. Let us pledge to ourselves, the whole of ourselves, to do all that we can to protect against gendered violence against all bodies, known and unknown, near and far, stranger or friend. And let us pledge to ourselves, the whole of ourselves, to inhabit these bodies, to honor these bodies, to celebrate these bodies, to defend these bodies, and I might add, to tell these bodies sacred stories as a spiritual practice and a path of love. So be it, see to it, and amen. May you go in peace.